Woo! Yay. Okay. Well, hey everyone. If we can settle in. Thanks so much for coming. My name is Heather Shapiro, and we're going to talk about how to end boring data with visualizations in Python today. So a little bit about me, Heather Shapiro. I'm a technical evangelist based in New York City, so I came a long way, but I actually went from New York City to Seattle, back to here, then back to New York. So it's been a bit of a travel, but I'm really excited to be here and show you a little bit about what I've been doing with Python in visualizations. And a tech evangelist, if you are wondering what that is, I like to say we're geeks who speak, so we're developers who don't have a product team, and we talk about everything, basically. My focus has been data science and machine learning and how to use it, especially with Microsoft technologies. So things we'll cover today: why data visualizations are important. I'm going to be looking at a case study on New York City restaurant ratings. This was just, it's most relevant to me when I was putting it together. There are tons of open data sources from Canada or other regions, wherever you're from, where you can look for similar data. All of the code that I'll show is online on GitHub, so if you wanted to put your own data set in there, you can, and try to run that. And I'll take you kind of on the journey of like what libraries I saw fit that were great, which ones I didn't necessarily like, and which ones were my favorite and whatnot. So why do we need data visualizations? Who wants to take a quick stab at that? I like to be interactive. You, yes. Exactly. Have one, boring meetings, exactly. Spreadsheets. Everyone gets a spreadsheet. Why else? Any other ideas? Business people. What about business people? Exactly, yeah. So it really helps the visual learner. It makes, it's hard to understand in general, so we have a quick Dilbert cartoon of spreadsheets. He's like, I put together a spreadsheet that might interest you. And he's like, ow, ow, it's hurting my head. And she's like, well, I get this a lot. So that happens often when you're in meetings. You're like, there's way too many numbers, spreadsheets everywhere. Why does everyone need a spreadsheet? And for the visual learner, it's really hard to look at a spreadsheet, a data set, and say, wow, I really understand what's going on here. So data visualizations really make it easier for the visual learner. It helps you tell a story. But then we've also seen the visualizations that have gone wrong, where they're like, there's way too many variables. This was just me looking up online, like, bad visualization. So I apologize if it's any of your visualization in here. But a visualization like this or a graph like this, there's way too many variables. It's 100 most active tweeters, but like, what does active mean? You really can't tell what's going on here. It could be like most followers, most tweets, I don't even know. So all the colors are so different. Then you have like a visualization like this, where I still don't really know what it's about, and I've done this talk for a couple months now. And so there's no title. I really don't know what any of these things are showing. So there's tons of things that like make a visualization good and tons of things that make them bad. So like we said, visualizations help the visual learner make sense of tremendous amounts of data. So if you have like millions of data points, no one's going to sit there and go through every one and make the trends. It helps you make that easier. It helps you with that exploratory analysis that you can really use to help guide your hypotheses or questions, business questions, et cetera. So a good chart, so some of the things we saw make it easy to compare. So if you're comparing two graphs, we've all seen the papers where you look at it and you're like, oh, this one's so much better from 2010, 2014. And then you're like, wait, the axes are completely different. And if I really normalize it, oh, wait, actually 2010 was much better. So in those papers, they're trying, it's kind of an ethical decision, I guess, from the person who's writing that paper and trying to make that graph of what's most important for them to show. So it's better to make it easy to compare so that people can actually understand it on their own. Keep it simple. Don't have too many colors that are the same. Have a title, axes, things you've heard, things you've seen. So I'm going to look at a quick case study, New York City restaurant ratings. This is all online. It's open data. For me, it's important because I like to go out through New York City, and I'm like, I really want to eat, get all the food, but which ones are the good restaurants to go to? There's all these different ratings. In different states, it's different. For us, we do a ABC. So it's pretty easy to tell, but I wanted to go in and see can we tell what's actually going on? Are these more like biased data sets and whatnot? So New York City Open Data has thousands of data sets. You can get one for restaurant ratings. It has the building, the street, zip code, what their violation was. There's also categories of like P&Z, which means pending or hasn't been inspected yet. So I wanted to go through, because when you look at other states, there are ones that are, okay, you see this person or this restaurant has a 99, and you're like, oh, that's pretty good. It's probably out of 100. And then you look back and it's actually out of 108, and you're like, wait, so that's not as good as I thought it was. Or when you see a 90, you're like, okay, 90%, I'll give it. Like, that's cool, but it's actually like much lower. So this ABC rating really helps us, and we'll take a look into that, see if we can like make visualizations just so that we can ask more questions, go into it a little bit more. Because I wanted to see, so we have these ratings, are they different by location? Are they different by maybe like whoever was the inspector was like biased? If we can tell that from the data. So I'm going to be using Jupyter Notebooks today. It's all hosted in Azure. So who here has worked with Jupyter Notebooks before? Oh, lots of you. Yay, cool. So Jupyter Notebooks, if you haven't seen it, makes it really easy for me to debug, and it's good for presentations. You can run line by line. So if I say 5 plus 2, you can run it. It'll output 7, things like that. So you can run line by line. It's good for presentations, and we'll walk through the code there. So this is all on my GitHub, and I'll share that link after. So basic steps, you load the modules, you load the restaurant rating data, understand the data, let's try to visualize it. And some of the libraries that I'll use today, we'll look at Pandas, Matplotlib, Basemap, Folium, Seaborn, Bokeh, Plotly. So these aren't all the visualization libraries that there are. I just went through as a beginner, which ones can I start with, which ones are most apparent, what do we do? So to get started, Pandas, probably the most important that you'll need from the beginning. So has everyone heard of Pandas? If you have, raise your hand. Lots of people. Okay. So Pandas is a Python library that is really useful to provide data analysis. It gives you series, it gives you data frames. It gives you data frames that are most similar to if you've ever worked in R, if you work in Excel, where you can actually mutate each column instead of actually going through a CSV and being like, oh, I have to go line by line, read it into a dictionary, and then do this and that. So Pandas makes that much easier. So if we look at a Pandas data frame, so for the New York City restaurant ratings, I just had to say, let's zoom in a little bit. I just had to say, okay, read the CSV. I only wanted to look at Manhattan because there's tons of boroughs and there were over 850,000 data points. So the perks of Pandas, you can just look at specific columns. You can look at what the column names are, and all I had to do was put that CSV in there. And if I wanted to get rid of some columns, I say I wanted to look at all the ones that had full data. I didn't want to do any missing data analysis here, so I'm like, anything that didn't have a grade or that didn't have a score, I got rid of. And it makes it super easy. You just say, like, if it's not null for grade, just remove it. So you can do descriptions of counts, means. So there's 84,000 in Manhattan that were in this data set. And then it gives you data sets or a data frame that looks like this with every column that is understandable and you can change. Cool. So if you haven't used Pandas yet, it's a great tool. It's built on top of NumPy, SciPy, Matplotlib, and allows you to do a lot for data analysis. So different libraries that you can use for statistical graphs, Matplotlib. It's one of the most popular ones, but it is a little bit of a learning curve to learn if you haven't had any MATLAB language experience before. So the code that you can do to run something like that would be like plot.subplots. And then if you want a histogram, MREF score, then you have all these different lines. And you get a basic graph that will show you frequency, score, so we can see most of the scores. So for this data set, the lower the score, the better. So you start at 0 if you're a restaurant, and then if you get an infraction, it goes up. So most of the scores are, oh, hey Cortana. So, not sure where she heard it from, but yeah. So most of the scores are actually below 20. So that's interesting. Is every restaurant in New York or in Manhattan like actually worth a less than 20 score? Is it worth an A? So that's something to take into account, look into when you're first starting looking at a data set. What should we be careful of? But Pandas actually makes it a lot easier to do that Matplotlib type graph. So you can do it really easily in shorthand, just saying, I want the score.hist, all the bins, the title, and you get the same graph. So it's a lot less lines of code, but very similar graphing. I'm sorry if I'm going through quickly. It's a pretty short amount of time, so I just want to get through it all, and we can answer questions after. Another tool that was really cool that I found was Seaborn. It gives you similar graphs that you're used to. The only hard part was just like figuring out what graphs are available. So there's like strip plots and bar plots, and you just have to look up that what that data set of like different types of graphs there are. But it's more sophisticated graphs that you could use for presentations, if you're writing a report or research papers. They look a little bit more professional. So you can write, once you learn the syntax of like .strip plot, all you have to do is put x equals grade, y equals score, data, and I'll show you what jitter equals true means in a second. But you get graphs that look like this that are a little bit more, more professional looking. I didn't put a title, so that's my bad. Whoops. But we can see, we can look at grade by score. And we see that mostly, okay, all the A's have like 20 or less, which makes sense. But then there's a lot of B's that it's going up. But what about all these C's that have 20 or less? Like, why do they have C's? What was wrong there? Like, it just gives you more information and a story to look into. And this jitter equals true. If we go back to the code and I remove it, nope, wrong one. So the jitter equals true just puts all the points on top of each other. Or jitter equals false puts all the points on top of each other. So you can't really see the density of how many data points are there. So having that function really helps you if you want to show like there's 80,000 points and people can make more sense of the data. But it's really a personal decision, I guess. So then you can get graphs that, so jitter equals true. You can also add legends where you say like, critical, not critical, not applicable. So if we look here for the A's, most of them are not critical, but there's a bunch that are, so it makes me a little bit weary, and I could go and pinpoint those. But for me, the most important part of the data science process is like the exploratory part, where you're looking at your data set. Let's just figure out all the questions that we could ask. It's good to start with one question. So for me, it was, okay, are there biases? Do all of the grades and scores match up? Does it make sense? And now that I'm looking at graphs about it, I can go and ask more questions and I can go look more into the data. So you can also make bar charts, box plots with all different types. And so they look more professional, things that you can put in a research paper. So then I started looking into libraries for mapping. The first one that I always find is Basemap, and I had a really hard time installing it on things like on Windows. So if anyone has a Windows machine and needs help with that, let me know and I can help you. So for me, it was really hard. It took probably a full day of like looking into it to try to actually just install the library, and then it was a hard time of creating a map. There's a lot of prerequisites for it. And you get graphs that look like this if you're trying to do local data. So this is apparently New York City. So it doesn't necessarily work well for that local data. So you can do it for geo mapping or heat maps, but for that local data, it takes a lot more than what's out of the box. Then there's a program or library called Folium, this one was my favorite, and it allows you to visualize data on a leaflet map. It has the local data already in there from OpenStreetMap, MapQuest Open, and it was really simple to read the documentation and learn. And actually, so to get the addresses to be in geolocation, I had to convert all the addresses to lat long. So I have street number, I had address, then city, then zip code. And with restrictions on like API calls, I just found another website that would do it for me, batch geocoding. So that took 30 seconds as opposed to like a couple hours of me trying to do it on my own. So there are different options for how you can geocode that for yourself. But Folium will give you, let's zoom out a little bit. If it loads, oh no. Let's see if that one, okay. So Folium can give you maps that look like this, and they're interactive. So I put the name, the restaurant, score. So this one's not clustered, so it's a little bit hard, and I actually took a random sample of 1,000 so that there's not 84,000 points that you can look at on here. That would be a little overwhelming. So the red ones are ones with a C, or green is A and whatnot. But it also allows you, if this one will load, it won't, but there are ones that like just allow you to cluster it. So all these data points are located in the same little spot. So it'll cluster it for you and say there's 10 here, there's 10 here, and then you can zoom in and it automatically updates. The also really cool thing about it is that you can just export this as an HTML and you can embed it into your website. So if you have a WordPress or you have a HTML website or anything, it has all the data in there for you. You just have to put it there. Like just copy the code and it gives you that, and you put it in your own CSS or whatnot. And the code was actually really simple. You just say like, I want the marker for anything that has an A. I want the lat long. The pop-up has this. And to cluster it, you just add this one line that says like, add to cluster, and it does it all for you. So it was really simple to learn from a new person's perspective. So then there's other libraries for other interactive plots. So if you're trying to create like bar charts or box plots that are more interactive, one that I found was Bokeh. It was a little bit more difficult to understand the documentation, so I'm looking into going back into that and adding to it on my own, just because there's so many different releases of it, so it's hard to, if I looked up something online, it would go back to an old release, and then I couldn't figure out how to do it in the new release. So it will give you different charts that you can move around. If you want to zoom, you can select an area. Zooming could be really great if you have really marginal discrepancies between the axes. So if it's like 0.1 and 0.2, and you want to see what the difference is. This data is not as granular, so it wouldn't be as important. But for other data sets, that could be really useful. It also gives you that HTML code that you can go and put into your websites as well. So that one's really awesome to use. And you can save it, do different, I don't know. Let's see, reset it, woo, yeah. You can also do labels, so with different, what's it called? Layering values, and you can do tabs. So it makes it more interactive. It's better mostly for a website, so not necessarily business purposes if you're having a meeting, but really great if you're trying to update your blog. Then the last one I wanted to talk about was Plotly. So has anyone worked with Plotly before? A few people, yeah. So Plotly, there is a paid version, but I'm using the solely like not paid free version. It's offline. Yeah, you don't even need an account for this part. You can just do it offline. And then if you wanted to host it somewhere, they make it really easy. The paid part, I think, is just if you wanted to make it private. So if you make a free account, you can still embed that into your WordPress site. You can embed it into a website. But they make it easy to create different graphs, also interactive, so you can scroll over. It will automatically do show you what the points are. You can zoom in again. Yay. And then you can also go view it on Plotly. So there's different options there that make it really awesome for interactiveness. But then if you want to do it as a map, I tried to look at that as well. This is the kind of map you would get. So it's good for interactive plots if you want to do basic graphing tools, or basic graphing. But when you're trying to like map things, let's try to zoom in a little bit. You don't really have that local data as well. So for mapping, you might use tools like Folium or Basemap, but for interactive tools, Plotly is better for basic graphs. So if we go back here. So now you can like go put them in your blog. So Plotly also gives you that HTML functionality where you can just say save as HTML, gives you that code, and you can do that really easily. So I know this was like a quick throw all of my knowledge at you presentation, but things that we covered, like why you need data visualization, what are the libraries that you can use in Python, which ones are better, which ones are worse. So for me, Basemap wasn't very useful because it didn't have that local data. But if you're trying to do geodata, heat maps, it's really a great tool, but the documentation wasn't necessarily there. Folium had great documentation and made it a lot easier and had that interactivity at local data pinpoints. And so it's a great way to like update your blog. It's a great way to impress your employers if you're trying to have a meeting with them, and you can show them in data visualizations and graphing, which will make it a lot easier. There's also tools like D3 that aren't in Python, but if you want to have a more intricate graph, they make graphing a little bit, or visualizations a little bit more fun. And they're interactive plots. If it will load. Wi-Fi. But, so they're all based in JavaScript. So there is a huge learning curve for learning them. A lot of times for me, it was I had to try and pinpoint my data set, or like match my data frame to what they're asking for, and that took the most amount of time. So I think Wi-Fi, it's not working, so go back. But D3 is an option. There's also things like ggplot, which if you're familiar with R, it's very popular there, and you can do it in Python, but there's a huge, huge learning curve for that. So that's why I didn't talk about it so much here. It does allow you a little bit more customizability for if you want to do more intricate statistics, you can use that. But the learning curve, like after years of doing it in school, every time I make a new graph, I have to go and look it up. So not one necessarily for a beginner to use. Then there's tons of resources that you can look at. So all of this is online on GitHub. If you go to Heather B. Shapiro. So then I had like Raleigh Open Data, New York City Open Data, there's data.gov, I found a similar data set for Canada called DineSafe that shows you, but I couldn't figure out how to get a CSV version of it, but if you can do the same kind of data analysis with that. Also, if you're using a work computer and can't necessarily install Python, there are data science virtual machines that Azure provides that have Python, R, everything already installed, and you can just go and create that virtual machine. Then if you're just looking to learn about data science in general, Azure Machine Learning is a great tool. It's a drag and drop tutorial that's online where you just put your data set in. You have to just know the process of you put a data set in, you want to clean the data set, then split it, et cetera. But you don't actually have to code, and you don't necessarily have to know statistics either. You can choose which algorithm you want to do, and it's a great learning tool without actually having to know how to code and whatnot. Then there's tons of resources on Channel 9 and Microsoft Virtual Academy. If you want to contact me, my email is hshapiro@microsoft.com. You can go find me on the Twitters with MicroHeather, and yeah, thank you.
We have 5 minutes for questions, so if anyone would like to ask anything, feel free to come up to the mic and ask.
Yep, or if anyone wants to come up and ask questions after, that's totally fine as well. But are there any questions? Nope.
Do you happen to know if Folium will consume GeoJSON data for plotting?
I believe so. I'm pretty sure, yeah, you can just put it in as that way. I only looked at it as with using Pandas that way, but I'm pretty sure you can use GeoJSON as well.
Is there anything for like plotting network structures or something? So let's just say you have social networking data or something like that.
Social networking data, D3 is probably my better choice for that. I didn't find any libraries like right off the bat that were great in Python. So if anyone knows of any and wants to raise your hand and share that, that would be great. But for social networking, I think like D3 gives you that interactivity and you can really customize. So it makes it a little bit easier to get that networking.
Is there anything that makes it like easier to generate your data with Python and use D3? So like integrate the two? Or anything
so
like
if
that?
you save it as a CSV, and then I think you have to convert it as a JSON for most of the time. So there are different packages that you can, if you have a Pandas data frame, you can save that as a CSV and it will automatically do that for you. I think it's just like pd.write CSV or saved CSV. And then you can convert that to
Right.
JSON.
So there's nothing that like makes it like
Go straight to D3.
Yeah.
No. Question. Yep.
You can use Vega. It's I heard about it in the last Python conference. It works strictly off of JSON, so there's less of a learning curve. You don't really have to know that much JavaScript. If you understand JSON is entirely declarative, you can declare columns and all the attributes for the graph. So it's very easy to integrate with the Jupyter Notebooks.
Okay, good.
And check out Jupyter Labs if you haven't. It's still in early alpha, I think, or maybe beta, I'd say. But definitely check that out if you want to integrate the two.
Okay, so you said Vega.
Vega, VEGA, and the project is Altair that will consume the Vega declarative definitions because it's the declarative mapping plotting system. So you just declare your data and it'll auto map it for you out of the JSON data.
Oh, awesome. Very cool. Any other questions? Yes.
Someone asked about social network graphs. I had the same question. I've been looking at Network X. I don't know if you heard of that. It's a Python package. Or if anyone else has any experience with it. I haven't formed my own opinion yet.
I haven't found any ones that I like, so I can like take a look into NetworkX more and try to see if that. I'll share it on my Twitter if I find a better one, or my blog, and let you know if I find a really great one, and that can help other people. So networking, D3 connections. I'll look for those and share that out. Any other questions? Cool. Well, thank you so much for coming. It's really great to be here. It's my second time in Canada, so yay.